Hi, my name is Craig Galloway and I want to tell you about a new tool that Fourth Quadrant has developed that will hopefully help farmers understand their pasture utilization better. It's called the Pasture Utilization Report and you'll find it at the top of your toolbar on Fourth Quadrant. The premise behind this report is that we've used a calculation of intake for animals based on megajoules. A lot of other pasture utilizations are using simple dry matter calculations, and we really believe that it's important that we work out especially cow and milk intake relative to milk production, relative to the weight of the cow, relative to pregnancy, relative to distances walked, so that that can be as accurate of a calculation as possible in megajoules, which we can then translate to dry matter based on the megajoules of the pasture and the megajoules of the concentrates and roughage. So the pasture utilization, everyone knows the back calculation, it's the same tool. We're calculating cows and milk, dry cows and heifers, what the daily dry matter intake is, which we can then compare to what pasture is produced after we've removed the concentrates and the roughage that's been fed to those animals. Factors in terms of accuracy is that the report uses your growth rates that you've measured for your pasture each month, and it multiplies these by the hectares of your platform which you input on the monthly input sheet. These are not always the same thing, your platform hectares and the area that you've measured. And on the utilization report, you'll see the first two lines show you what the platform is that would be used in the calculation, and it gives you how many hectares you've measured as a way of cross-checking those to see how well what you've measured represents your platform. You can always go back and change the area of your platform on the monthly input, but it's important that the growth rate is being multiplied by the total platform area, because that's all the pasture that you've been growing and should be utilizing in a month. There's a whole section at the top of the report which you can click on called physical data that shows you what information is going into these calculations, and this includes milk production, cow weights, feeding of concentrates and roughage that has been done. And what's really important is that you input this data accurately and correctly. What we've often seen is that people would fill in roughage, for example, to dry cows as a once-off when the lorry delivers the roughage, as opposed to what was actually fed during that month. So it's becoming increasingly important for a report like this that the data is captured accurately for each month so that it can reflect what was fed during that month, so we can compare that to how many animals there are and to how much pasture they should have taken in. And that's what we're comparing to how much you've grown. Obviously, another factor that comes into play is that you might have cut silage off of your pastures. And that's another important thing to capture, since this is pasture that was grown, that will reflect in your growth rates, but you don't want to have that be compared to what your pasture intake was with your animals, because you've actually taken that off and stored it and are going to feed it at another date. So it's important that you use the tool that Fourth Quadrant gives you for cutting silage, how many tons you've created as a homegrown silage, and then at a later stage when you do feed it out, that you actually then fill it in as fed. And this will result in the most accurate possible calculation of utilization for your farm. Another thing that we've incorporated is there's a couple of parameters that we've allowed for you to be able to adapt to your specific context. Most importantly of this is the pasture NDF, where you can go in and set your NDF for your pastures each month so that you have an accurate representation of the quality of those pastures when the calculation is applied. You can also adapt the amount of megajoules that are applied to a kilogram of concentrates, or your average megajoules per kilogram of roughage, the distance your cows walk, the amount of elevation there is on your farm, so that we can come to the closest possible calculation of what the megajoule requirement is for your animals, which we can then translate into the most accurate possible dry matter intake. And that's what we're going to use to calculate how much your cows have taken in. Another important data input for this report to work accurately is that you enter grazings. So what Fourth Quadrant does is that it calculates the requirement of pasture relative to the animals that have been on the pastures that month. So if you never fill in a grazing event, for example, for your dry cows in a month, the assumption will be that your dry cows do not take in any pasture. And the same thing for heifers. It is possible to exclude heifers from this report. There's a tick box that you can tick and it will take heifers out of the calculation. But if your heifers and your dry cows graze on your platform, then it's really important that you actually create events for these grazings so that the calculation can factor in the fact that those animals have actually eaten some of the pasture. Your utilization will obviously be too low if you've had dry cows on the platform and haven't recorded those as grazing events. As you scroll through the report, you'll be able to see what the calculation is that Fourth Quadrant has applied as the megajoule intake required for each group of animals and how this translates into kilograms dry matter per animal per day, which is what has been used in the calculation. Another thing that you can check in the report is the concentrates and supplements fed in kilograms dry matter per animal per day. And this is an important way of seeing whether the data that you filled in is accurate, whether it translates to what you actually, how you've approached your management on your farm. At the bottom of the report, you'll see the actual outcome of what we're trying to get under the utilization section. And what we've shown is a pasture intake versus what pasture was grown in total tons for the farm for each month, in tons per hectare for the farm, or in kilograms per hectare per day, so that you can understand it according to how best you relate to these values. Right at the bottom of the report, you'll be able to see that there's a chart that shows you for the full 12-month period that you've selected, the total dry matter intake per hectare versus the total dry matter that you say you've grown per hectare. And obviously with the utilization, we're trying to get those two things as close to each other as possible. And then to the right hand side of that, you'll see the exact same thing displayed on a per month basis. We really believe that this report can have great value to you if you take it as a tool to examine why it might be that your utilization is not as close to 100% as what you would have thought it should be. If it's above 100%, have you accounted for everything that you've been feeding on the farm? Are you measuring your growth correctly and accurately to ensure that you are actually taking into account all of the pasture that you grow on your farm? If you're well below 100%, well, then have you taken into account all the grazings that have taken place on the platform? Or are you over measuring your pastures and might be thinking that you have more pasture than what you actually have available? Have you taken into account the fact that you removed silage from the pasture and you haven't filled that in? Or maybe you've just been overfeeding and not actually taking in as much pasture as what you think. But all of these are the types of questions that can come out of such a valuable report if you can fill your data in as accurately as possible. And we'd love to engage with you further about any questions that you might have about the report or how to get the data right. It's important to note that this pasture utilization report is only available from version 4.1.4 on Fourth Quadrant. If you have a version earlier than this, unfortunately, you won't be able to see this report. So please also contact us about updating your Fourth Quadrant so that you have the most recent available version and so that you can take advantage of all the new tools that Fourth Quadrant has developed to assist you as a farmer make better decisions on your farm.